US President Donald Trump says talks over a ceasefire in Gaza are, quote, going along very well. He met with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over dinner at the White House on Monday, where the pair discussed Gaza's future. The White House says Special Envoy Steve Witkoff will now travel to Qatar this week to join the ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas. Netanyahu also suggested there was progress on his plan to relocate Palestinians out of Gaza, indicating they were talking to several countries about taking them. The plan is backed by the US. Netanyahu also added, I think President Trump had a brilliant vision. It's called free choice. You know, if people want to stay, they can stay. But if they want to leave, they should be able to leave. It shouldn't be a prison. It should be an open place and give people free choice. And to talk about this with me in the studio is now Jamal Nusseibeh, a Palestinian-American lawyer and investor. He's been involved in Palestinian affairs and peace negotiations since the 1990s and has spoken on Middle East issues on Capitol Hill. Jamal, as we've just heard, Israel's Prime Minister is again floating the idea of, quote, voluntary immigration from Gaza. What's your take on that?
Thank you, Gerhard, for having me. Look, I think that first and foremost, before people leave Gaza, they have to get food, they have to get aid, they have to get shelter. Second, people should be allowed to live, first and foremost, in the land that they consider their home. So although it's nice to be able to travel, and possibly some would want to leave, had they wanted to leave, they would have already done so. Were it easy to get the Palestinians out of Gaza, out of the rest of Palestine, they would have left. So, in my view, sure, offer people better futures however you possibly can, but those who wish to stay should be allowed to stay and live a decent, dignified life in a reasonable political context, meaning their own country with freedom and all the rights.
Do you think most would choose to stay?
I think it very much depends on what we can rebuild there. I think that most Gazans, when we had the first ceasefire, we had this enormous march of return, hundreds of thousands of Gazans returning to the north of Gaza, although it was pretty much destroyed. And I think that shows the depth of attachment. So yes, I think they probably would.
Now, Donald Trump is hosting Israel's Prime Minister at the moment, and he has publicly expressed a great desire for a ceasefire in Gaza. Do you believe Trump is genuinely engaging here? And can his administration be an effective force for peace?
Yes, certainly to the second. I think that his administration can be an effective force for peace because it's shown that it has leverage over Israel and in the region. And it's also shown that it's willing to use that leverage. So, for instance, when Israeli planes were off to bomb Iran towards the, just before the last hour before the ceasefire, Trump actually called Netanyahu and said, you get those planes back. And Netanyahu complied. So yes, there is leverage. There is clearly a desire on the part of this US administration to get somewhere. What I find crucial here to think about, though, is what they're trying to get to. Because a partial ceasefire or a short-term ceasefire only in Gaza, only with Hamas, will not lead to peace. And the only way that there is going to be a safe and secure future for Israel, for the Palestinians, for the region, is through a real peace. Anything else is a Band-Aid. We can talk about that.
Yeah, I'll come back to that a little later. But first, one of the issues that has derailed ceasefire talks in the past is Hamas' demand for a lasting end to the war, which Israel has so far been unwilling to guarantee. Is that a major sticking point?
I would think it would be a major sticking point for anyone, including the Americans, because everybody wants an end to the war. What Hamas, I think, is asking for is some kind of a guarantee that if the ceasefire talks or the post-ceasefire talks continue beyond 60 days, that the Americans or others will step in to make sure Israel doesn't breach the ceasefire once again, as it did once or twice before already. It should be clear that both the Palestinians and the Israelis need an end to war. It's self-evident. So for it to be a sticking point in negotiations doesn't really make sense to me. I think that a well-intentioned Israeli government would actually support that and hopefully work towards ending the war with the Palestinians.
Now, Israeli media are reporting that Defense Minister Israel Katz is planning a so-called humanitarian city now. That's the latest suggestion for displaced people in Rafah. He reportedly said it would be administered by international partners. Any idea who that could be?
Well, we've seen the international partners that Israel decided to bring in to replace the United Nations. The Gaza, so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is a very opaque organization. It's unclear who funds it. It's really unclear who's behind it. What is clear is how badly they are carrying out their supposedly humanitarian work and how many people have been killed either by the contractors themselves or by the Israeli army near there. So they are politicizing aid and creating a situation which is completely unacceptable. Most, if not all, international aid organizations have refused to work with them. So one would hope that anything that is done in Gaza is done correctly with the appropriate international organizations such as the United Nations, which Israel is trying to get out of Gaza. It doesn't give me much hope that that will be the case, but I also have an issue with the concept of creating new spaces to round people up and put them behind new fences. Israel Katz also mentioned the idea that they would be put in and then de-radicalized and not let out. It doesn't sound particularly humanitarian to me.
No, it doesn't. You recently co-authored a Palestinian armistice plan for the Cambridge Initiative on Peace Settlement. In your findings, what or who has been the biggest obstacle to a lasting ceasefire so far?
Well, I don't believe that the situation in Gaza right now, for a ceasefire to exist, requires really more than one side. What we're seeing in Gaza right now is an Israeli army which is deep inside Gaza, which is killing, bombing, shooting, destroying. So to ceasefire, the Israeli army just has to stop doing that. Hamas, to the extent that it is Hamas or whatever other factions are in Gaza and fighting back, are really just fighting back against this foreign army, which is destroying their homes and killing their families.
They could release the hostages as a first step.
They could, and perhaps they should. In fact, I mean, I don't think that hostages should be held anyway. I think civilians should be maintained, although most of the remaining hostages, by the way, are, I believe, military. But I don't believe that at least civilians should be held. I think Israel also obviously holds almost 10,000 Palestinians, many of whom are held without trial in Israeli jails and camps. But that aside, I think that a ceasefire can be very easily achieved by just stopping shooting. I think that the release of hostages should be done also during the coming sort of few weeks. But what we really need to do is get to a comprehensive armistice. So a situation that allows the Palestinians and the Israelis to feel safe. Both of them need to feel safe and secure. And also one that allows them to begin to reform and redevelop within their individual societies. That requires, I believe, everybody to understand that Gaza is not Gaza, it's part of Palestine. Gazans are not Gazans, some are, but they're all Palestinians. And what we need to do is build towards a peace between Palestinians and Israelis on the basis of Palestine in 67, Israel in 48.
Very briefly, how likely you think that's going to be?
I think if President Trump and Europe work together and the rest of the world, we're seeing what the BRICS are doing, for instance, at a big conference on July 15th in Colombia. If everybody works in the same direction to apply international law and get to the outcome that is desired, then it is completely possible. It's difficult, but it's possible. And I have hope, because hope is what we need.
Thank you very much, Jamal Nusseibeh, there, for taking the time coming to our studio. Let's cross to Tel Aviv and bring in Mairav Zonszei. She's a senior analyst at the International Crisis Group. That's an independent think tank working to prevent wars. Mairav, Israel's prime minister is in Washington, and he's again raised the idea that Gazans should be able to leave the Strip and head to neighboring countries. Has any country in the world by now declared a willingness to take in Palestinians if indeed they wanted to leave?
Well, it's good to be with you. I mean, first, let's think about what it means to be in Gaza right now. It has become destroyed and uninhabitable. So it's quite cynical for the Israeli prime minister to talk about free choice in a place that has been under siege for years, is under a Hamas regime, is under an Israeli occupation and Israeli bombardment for months and months and months. I think any person who would be able to leave would leave, and also do so with a heavy heart, knowing they may never be able to return. As to your question about which countries, I think Israel has been working hard to find a country and still has not found a country that would take any number of Palestinians. That is a significant number. There are 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, and I don't see any country taking in all of those Palestinians, nor do I see that solving the problem at the core of the Israel-Palestine crisis. So I think much of this is mostly rhetoric at this point.
Now, Israeli media are reporting another idea by Defense Minister Israel Katz, who has reportedly ordered preparations for a huge camp to house 600,000 displaced Palestinians. Katz was quoted as saying a humanitarian city would be constructed in Rafah during a 50-day ceasefire, and that the Israeli military would provide security checks for those entering. What do you think of this plan?
Again, we're almost 2 years into the war. Israel has managed to kill many Palestinians, destroy life there, but not to actually defeat Hamas or bring back all the hostages. So all of these plans, not only are they cynical in the use of the word humanitarian, there's nothing about what's happening in Gaza that's humanitarian. But regardless of the moral issue, on a practical issue, Israel hasn't been able to achieve its goals. I don't see what pushing Palestinians like cattle again into another area is going to change. And as long as there is no resolution, ceasefire, rehabilitation, ability for Israelis and Palestinians to see a future of security and safety, then no amount of plans or rhetoric about how these plans are humanitarian is going to change the situation.
Now, let's talk about the ceasefire negotiations. They've resumed in Qatar and got off to a rather unpromising start. Can a truce be achieved when such proposals that we've just discussed are being tabled by the Israeli government?
I mean, the sticking points about a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel have remained the same. The current ceasefire on the table is a temporary and partial one. It's one that the hostage families and much of the Israeli public think is not a good deal. They want to see all the hostages back. They want to see an end to the war. Israel has been bleeding soldiers. Today alone, overnight, 5 soldiers were killed, many more injured. This is not a sustainable way to keep going for either side. So it really is up to Trump. If Trump decides he wants to get the ceasefire, I think he will have to force it on both sides. For now, Netanyahu seems in a politically dominant position after the Iran war to go for a ceasefire. But again, this is a partial ceasefire, and this is something that Hamas has insisted must result in an end to the war. So unless there's something happening behind the scenes, ultimately, I don't see a change currently on the ground that will allow for the ceasefire, but there's definitely a lot of buildup by Israel and the U.S. towards a ceasefire this week.
Now, your organization, the International Crisis Group, works to foster peace. From that standpoint, what would you like to see in a ceasefire agreement for Gaza so it produces a lasting end to the war? Briefly, if you can.
Yeah, well, that's a bit hard because it has to do also with the day after in Gaza, and it has to do with the ability for Palestinians to have agency and self-determination over their lives, and for Israel to be able to live with secure, clear borders. But the first step is to get a ceasefire, and that ceasefire has to be permanent, and it has to have several stages of sustained political engagement by the U.S. and by actors in the Arab world to ensure that Hamas can remove itself from governance in Gaza, that there can be security guarantees for Palestinians living there, that they will not be under bombardment, that Israelis who live near Gaza are able to live there securely. And this will require a bunch of different mechanisms and a bunch of different parties to be consistently engaged on this issue. But first and foremost, we need Trump to force a ceasefire this week.
Mairav Zonszei there from the International Crisis Group. Thank you very much, Mairav.
Thanks for having me.